Charles, if you would introduce yourself.
So Charles Benoit, I'm the trade counsel for the Coalition for a Prosperous America. We're a group exclusively dedicated to those who make and grow things in the United States. So we're always going to protect the home market first, right? We're not here to champion imports. We're not here to champion trying to get better conditions for multinationals in an overseas country. We are here to defend people who grow and make things in America for the American market and want to preserve that American market for people who do grow and make things here.
Okay, awesome. And again, just for our listeners watching this later, it's February 27th today, my youngest son's birthday. And there was a Supreme Court ruling that came out earlier this week, I believe, or maybe it was a week ago now, affecting the IEEPA tariffs.
Correct.
That I've learned a few terms from you, Charles. And if you don't mind, would you, because I find this really interesting, we visited a couple times and you've shared with me kind of briefly your history and how you got to this position with the Coalition for Prosperous America. If you don't mind sharing that, I think that's...
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm a trade lawyer. It was a kind of a very small niche for a long time. It was, not that sexy, but I was into it, and I started out with there wasn't many groups employing. It was pretty much trade lawyers. You didn't find them almost outside of DC, and I went to school in Georgetown Law, so I graduated there. Kind of came up in that world, and it started with General Electric. Actually, it was really lucky. They had a legal fellowship program. But I definitely kind of saw firsthand, all these this whole global rules-based trade system that we live in is just completely bonkers. I mean, this is a totally raw deal. If you're trying to operate within the system, forget it. Like it's just guaranteed offshoring. So personally, I was very aligned when President Trump, one of his the guy has a lot of good instincts as someone who, who's not a trade lawyer. He's got a lot of good instincts about how things really work. And one of them was that, prior to Trump, the message had always been other countries are cheating at the rules. And Trump kind of just had the correct view, which is that, I mean, what are we even talking about? If the rules aren't working for you and you're spending decade after decade after decade accusing everyone of cheating, maybe revisit the rules. Maybe the system's actually rigged against us. That was the correct move. Instead of just saying, oh, they're cheating, being like, how about we actually just change the circumstances at home? We are a sovereign country at the end of the day, and we can control access to our market. So, that was I really appreciated that.
Yeah, and sorry, I just want to ask you to that point of the other countries not following the rules. It appears like we have had and have very little clout in enforcing that, or
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I encourage people to don't even think about enforcement. Okay, don't even think about it. There's never going to be such a thing as a level playing field. And whenever the reason. We have actually a great clip that we put together at CPA. It's pinned to the top of my X profile, but it's president after president after president saying the words, "We just want a level playing field." No, okay? There is no world where it makes sense to put American ranchers into unlimited price competition with ranchers in other countries, which may often be just vertically integrated meatpacking operations. No, we don't want to put American workers, farmers, ranchers, and business owners into unlimited price competition with the whole world. There is never a scenario where that makes sense. And certainly in farming, I mean, and manufacturing, I mean, we see it. You're never going to synchronize all of the the labor laws, the environmental laws. You can't have a level playing field. Right. So we just need to approach trade on a product by product, sector by sector basis, not country by country, product by product, sector by sector. First and foremost, not saying you can't do country deals, but you always have to think of how we're going to approach everything product or commodity first. And then, to what extent are we going to be import reliant? Are we import reliant? Are we always going to be import reliant? Or, is there a pathway to not being import reliant? And manage that access, right? So it's a distinction between, I think of rules-based trade as we're going to conjure up these fake rules and then let the chips fall where they may. And if we lose our industry, too bad, so sad, we were outcompeted. That's rules-based trade, completely insane. And then our managed trade is we're just going to decide how much we want to be import reliant or not for any given thing. Maybe vanilla from Madagascar, maybe we're fine with that, right? Like, okay, we don't need to make him, we're satisfied with our Madagascar vanilla supply chain. We'll leave it alone, and maybe we'll just do total zero tariff, let it come in. Maybe that makes sense. For beef, I would say it does not, and we don't want to lose the last rancher. And so those are the kind of decisions you got to make, and just manage the access.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. So I'm thinking maybe would be best if you don't mind first explaining to us what the IEEPA tariffs is. That's
yeah.
What were just sort of struck down or whatever. Maybe explain to us how those functioned.
Yeah. So to start at a high level, the Constitution of the United States is pretty clear. Tariff power belongs to Congress. Article 1, Section 8, the power to lay and collect duties. So this is congressional power. Unfortunately, our Congress doesn't actually like to govern, as probably most of your listeners are aware. They prefer viewing themselves as more of like a board of directors mindset. So not much of a legislature anymore. And they've delegated a lot of their functions, including tariff power. Now, there's not one law that delegates their tariff power to the president. There's actually many, I don't know, about a dozen. Some are super micro, but then there's like IEEPA, which was the most broad one. So IEEPA was the one that it had not been used for tariffs. It'd been used one time. A predecessor statute had been used one time in the 70s, but generally speaking, no, it hadn't been used for tariffs. And so this was very novel. The President Trump was using this International Economic Emergency Act for tariffs this go around. The other big statutes that you'll hear, just to kind of get the numbers out of the way, there's Section 232. Those are like the national security tariffs that are often sectoral. That's my favorite. That's the one I think the president should be most focused on. So Section 232, national security, and that's where you get our steel tariffs, aluminum tariffs, copper tariffs, lumber tariffs, all of these sector and supply chain approaches. And I really lament that we haven't had a 232 action in agriculture. That's like a huge miss so far for this administration. Agriculture, Secretary Rollins at USDA should be working with the Department of Commerce on agricultural Section 232 actions. Okay, so we haven't had any of that. And then there's another one called Section 301, and you're going to be hearing a lot more about that this year. This was used against China, and that's like unfair trading practices, but it's more against hitting one country at a time. IEEPA enabled the president to just sort of go global. So we had more than half a dozen, I think, IEEPA tariff actions in 2025. Two of them were the big money makers. So we got the 10% universal. That's when the president campaigned on, and he used the IEEPA law to proclaim 10% tariff on all imports. Canada and Mexico were exempted if the good met the USMCA certificate, standard, which majority of them did. So Canada and Mexico were kind of mostly at that. And then there was another supplemental 20% on China, and those were big money makers, right? I mean, just those two orders alone were bringing in well over $100 billion a year, and and then there was a bunch of other more minor IEEPA actions. There was, one on India to try to get them to stop buying Russian oil. There was one on Brazil, and that was linked to sort of like the domestic political situation over there, and how they were dealing with the former leader. And so, and one of the things that made IEEPA kind of wild was that it was like, I want to say like a magic wand, but the president could just sort of drop these things out of the sky. Like you get a Truth Social, you could go from Truth Social post to actual implementation very quickly, days. So And the IEPA actions were also at the center of the Liberation Day. That was when the big IEPA actions were deployed, the big universal one, and then all the supplemental country rates. So there was the 10% universal, and then countries, depending on the size of their trade deficit, got an extra rate. So it was this whole thing.
We're essentially all percentage, right? Like,
yeah, they're all like just they're all different percentage rates, and frankly, I think it was, this is why I'm not, economists, like, kind of often I've got some good friends who are economists, and my work with some great economists, but as a profession, they're certainly the bane of my existence. There's so much made up nonsense, and sometimes they get a little too academic. So countries got IEPA tariff rates depending on the extent of their trade deficit, but that was it was a little ridiculous. And, poor Madagascar, who I mentioned earlier, got hit pretty high because we buy a lot of spices from them. And, I was like, it didn't make any sense. I don't think it was a good approach. But look, I understand, for your audience, this is not going to affect you. Okay. So the IEPA actions, overwhelmingly, these were revenue tariffs. So leverage and revenue. Okay. So I say tariffs can be for one of three things. Just revenue. So I would put the 10%, universal, which was an IEPA order. That's a revenue tariff. Okay. We're just funding the tax cuts that they did in the One Big Beautiful Bill. So that's tariffs for revenue. Okay. Then you can do tariffs for protection. And those are really the Section 232 tariffs to, like, protect an industry. And then tariffs for leverage, which was also how IEPA was being used, with all the, like, India, stop buying Russian oil, Brazil, don't do this, and so forth. And the threats, a lot of threats. So tariffs for leverage. Look, I think I do personally care about the revenue. I worry. I wish more people in Congress were worried about our unsustainable budget deficits. And at the end of the day, they passed tax cuts premised right on this tariff revenue. The Congressional Budget Office estimated that the president's additional tariffs, and again, the IEPA were the big moneymakers, we're going to lower the federal deficit by almost $3 trillion over 10 years. So, I think it's insane that Congress isn't reacting more strongly and be like, we got to codify this because you passed tax cuts paying for it. So look, we can have that whole discussion, but I think that for ranchers, look, none of this was providing any protection. Okay. I mean, you call it 10%, or even if Brazil gets to 50%, the imports don't stop. Okay. So what's that?
Oh, I was just saying, especially, like, I think you and I talked about this, when an item is so much cheaper to buy that, it's not like the Brazilian beef is at the same price point as the US beef, and then they're adding a 50% tariff on it. That would maybe be a limiter.
Yeah, exactly. People, a common mistake is that people think of ad valorem tariffs, percentage tariffs, the way they think about a sales tax, right? So, I don't know, in Florida, we got a 6% sales tax. It's not complicated. You just walk into a store and it's 6% on top of whatever you see. Yeah. Tariffs are unfortunately not nearly as straightforward. The percentage, the law says it's supposed to apply to the importer's transaction price. Well, now right away, like, red flag, because that's not unlike a listed price on a store shelf. The importer's transaction price is not a public thing. Okay, this is a private contractual relationship. The parties on both sides are usually related or have a comprehensive deal. Right. So it's a very ineffective way to do anything, frankly, except generate a bit of revenue. But certainly for protection, they tend to be pretty ineffective because you can just, every overseas vendor, they can't get arrested. They're judgment proof. So they'll write you an invoice for whatever you want. So, I just don't think that any of the IEPA tariffs were providing any protection for the home market to ranchers. So if I was a rancher, I wouldn't be overly, you say, what does this mean for me? I don't think much. Other than to the extent, hopefully, it gets the administration more focused on Section 232s, including for agriculture.
Right. Okay. Very good. So is this the time to go into an explanation of the Section 232? Yes.
Yeah, well, so, we've got, I think 12 investigations were launched last year, and a lot of them cover huge swaths of the economy. So, the aluminum tariff action isn't just slabs of primary aluminum. It's beer cans. It's soda cans. It's the steel has everything from slabs of steel to bicycles. So these are big actions and affecting a lot of industry. The lumber one is, and the administration is definitely getting a bit better with each one. They're getting a bit more sophisticated. So the lumber one, they kind of backed off on doing anything on lumber, just a 10% tariff on lumber. It's not the way I would have approached that, but it is interesting that as they went down the supply chain, like kitchen cabinets got a 25%, was supposed to go to 50 on January 1st. The president kicked it back a year, but I think that's an encouraging way to do it. Quota is going to, I think you're going to have to see more of that. So, beef imports are already subject to a quota, and but it's Canada and Mexico are not, so that blows open. You got no market certainty. They can send unlimited cattle and unlimited beef, and then the quota numbers. In Australia, the quota is so high, and even the over quota tariff is so meaningless that imports continue. So an obvious move would be, and I can't believe it hasn't happened yet, but in light of everything, beef's been high profile. It's been a high profile year, and the price of beef. At a minimum, what you could do with the Section 232, because obviously there's a ton of sensitivity. Right? We just saw the president actually expand market access and quadruple Argentina's beef quota, which is really, that's really that opportunity. That was the perfect opportunity to, if you're going to do that, at least in tandem, they could have used Section 232 to strengthen the quota in future years and give ranchers the certainty they need to rebuild the herd. Right. So they could have used it to say, okay, we're expanding access this year, but we're going to begin tightening access. And in 2028, 2029, we're going to be much tighter. And they could have used all of that to get to, put Canada and Mexico on quota as well, to say, we're going to start tightening this market so ranchers have the certainty they need to start rebuilding the herd. And from what I'm hearing, they're not getting that yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do I can't remember if we've talked about this before, I guess, but like in the ag world, a lot of spokesmen for ag groups really push exports, and like you talked about these trade relationships, and we just have to be willing to accept some imports, because if we do that, then we can export and more than make up for whatever the amount was imported. Are other countries using tariffs and that kind of thing, or is that not even relevant to this conversation? Or
well, look, okay, this is the process. This is how processors, giant processors, Cargill, probably most successful among all of them, but this is how they play DC, and they tell DC the problem is, quote unquote, unfair trade, and if you can just get a deal to get more market access in this other country, then that'll be a huge win for farmers and ranchers, because we'll export more and we'll grow. And that's, aside from soybeans, there's been no export success story. Even for corn, if you just compare, 1995 was really bad. That was right after the WTO Uruguay round and NAFTA. That was a 1-2. Really bad whammy for farmers and ranchers. And if you actually compare, our population has grown by over a third since that time. And then if you just look at our total output of fruits and vegetables, proteins, fiber, like anything other than refined carbohydrates, our total, despite our population increasing by more than a third, our output's gone down.
Right.
So, if we were, you would think, even with zero new exports, you would think we're growing more and harvesting more because our population's gone up, but the opposite. So our net import reliance is surging. Famously, as of a couple of years ago, we're a net food importer, and it's just going to keep on getting worse. And so it's so insane to me that we continue to hear Senator Grassley talking about the point of the tariffs is just to win more market access abroad. It's like, why don't we try and save our home market? Florida strawberries right now, I mean, they're resorting to having to file anti-dumping petitions because they're about to get wiped out. Florida citrus is almost gone. And they can't help themselves. Senator Crapo and Senator Wyden, the top Republican and top Democrat on trade in the Senate, respectively, they're the leaders of the Senate Finance Committee. I mean, they just had new legislation yesterday, and they're out there saying, the world is hungry for U.S. grown blueberries. No, they're not. Okay, no, they're not. We've been championing this for decades, winning market access abroad, and we just lose our home market, and our import reliance for blueberries is at an all-time high. Rice is another one. 1980, and all the rice we consumed in America, pretty much like 99%, was grown here, and that's cratered by more than a quarter. So, it's completely insane when you hear a politician talk about winning more exports. We're going to send more rice to Japan. Are you kidding me? Like, just defend our home market. And again, food. Don't you want it? Isn't food supposed to be local, right? We can ship blueberries halfway around the world, but in fact, they've lost all their nutritional value, even if there's games to make them look the same.
Right.
So
I was just going to add to that point. I was just recently researching on something in Canada, and I came across their like the Canadian Cattlemen's Association or whatever, like a kind of a report that they had on their imports and exports and whatnot. And if I remember right, they export about 50% of their, I'm not sure if it was beef and cattle or just beef, but 50% anyway, and their cattle prices are no better than ours. So I thought that was an interesting point to make, that, we're a lot in our industry, a lot of people are touting, just like you said, all we have to do is export more and we'll make more money, or the value of our product will go up. And I thought,
no.
Well, apparently 50% isn't the magic number, because
That's a really good point. Yeah. It's to destroy your bargaining position. That's all it is. Open borders means you've got, it destroys any pricing power you might have. As we see in lamb, right? They're very, very vertically integrated down in Australia, New Zealand. And so obviously they're going to have a preference to serve the market from where they can do that. JBS, I started hear Senator Wyden talking about how they're cutting down the Amazon for more ranch land, and this is who they're putting you in competition to. And all of your congressmen and senators who are talking about exports, it's actually insane, asylum level crazy. In Canada, I'm pretty critical of the PM over there. He doesn't get it at all. Look at automotive. Both Canada and the United States. Canada's population has surged even more. Canada's population, I believe, is up almost 40% since NAFTA. We're up about over a third, or about a third. Both Canada and the United States assembled fewer vehicles in 2025 than they did in 1995.
Wow.
Assembled fewer vehicles, and despite this massive population surge. It makes no sense, but until you look, well, where because the market's not shrinking. And the market for new vehicle sales is a lot larger than it was in 1995, but it's being serviced more and more by imports. And it's Canada and the United States both have the same strategy of more and more FTAs. Canada's got even more FTAs. Got an FTA, a free trade agreement with Europe, and so on. They when we withdrew from TPP, they went in on it, and it's not doing anything. They're just the exact same phenomenon we're having. They're just losing our home market. And look, I'll say one last thing about why rules-based trade is so insane, but it's because here, in the United States especially, we actually believe in free market competition. The rest of the world does not. This is a uniquely American idea. The rest of the world is far more into national champions, okay, than they are free market competition. And so, but that does give them a leg up in this quote unquote rules-based trade, because the American attitude, we want free market capitalism. So our attitude is just, okay, well, we're just going to have these rules for the market of how you compete, and then other than that, let it rip, and you all fight it, and may the best man win, and that's good. I think that's a big part of American exceptionalism. So to be clear, I'm conservative. I believe in the benefits of free market capitalism, but I believe it's got to be within a home market. You cannot do it across borders, because they don't have antitrust in Brazil. They don't have our labor, our environmental laws, and so not only when we get rid of tariffs and we take unlimited imports for any product, any good, not only are you making all of our labor and environmental rules a hindrance, and the fact that we do have some level of antitrust, maybe, that becomes a hindrance. But you're benefiting the countries that are willing to roll up their sleeves, pick a winner. And then I think, by the way, that's a big change, right? In America now, we see, the U.S. government owns a stake in Intel. We own a stake in U.S. Steel. This was the if you don't like this, I get it. But it was the inevitable result of globalization. It was the inevitable result of what Senator Grassley's championed his whole life. Because that's how other countries do it. So it's just America is turning into like another country. Other countries, we're just going to have a handful of national champions. Consumers will be poorly served, and small independent producers, forget about it. You're cooked.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know the government had invested in those in those industries. So okay, so I guess if you don't mind, and I think you already explained this, but maybe we'll just go back and simplify as much as we can as far as what the Supreme Court ruling did exactly. Yeah. Did it just wipe out or halt all of those tariffs?
Yeah, it canceled all the IEEPA tariffs, and there's going to be a massive refund, which the administration doesn't seem to have much of a plan about. I think, absent legislation, I don't know how this stops. So estimates are between 140 to 175 billion. It's going to get refunded to importers. And when I say importers, a lot of that is actually overseas vendors. So massive blow to the Treasury that our Congress seems disinterested in. The heightened Brazil, India, those are all gone. Those heightened tariffs, 10% universal's gone. Now, because the president seems to alone, he actually does care about revenue. Like it's always been something that President Trump, no one in his cabinet seems to. Well, maybe Secretary Lutnick a little bit, but President Trump really cares about tariff revenue. No one on Capitol Hill does, sadly. But so what the administration did do was they used this another presidential tariff power. This one's called Section 122 to redeploy the 10% universal tariff. But it's also not legally a sure thing. I don't know. We won't get into it. I mean, it has to do with something called balance of payments. Do we have a balance of payments crisis or not? This is kind of like a concept that sort of predated the pure fiat money era. So there's debate about whether we have one of these crises or not. It's not. I'm not the person to engage in that debate. But nonetheless, not legally a sure thing. But that, whereas the Supreme Court decision was on a Friday, and that was the end of that. But Monday morning they had the Section 122 10% universal go in. So that's still there, the 10% universal. Okay. It has a 150-day expiry date though, and it's not clear what's going to happen next.
Okay. And at the end of that 150 days, it could not be renewed.
Congress can extend it.
Okay.
But it doesn't seem. We'll see, but that's not been like the State of the Union might have been a good time to bring that up. And instead the president said the words, "We don't need congressional legislation." And I've been telling people that he's getting terrible advice. I disagree strongly with that. USTR is talking about using the Section 301 power to try to maintain a lot of that revenue, but they would have to do one against every country in the world. And one by one, there's ways they could go around it, but gosh, we're getting increasingly, legally precarious. So to my mind, telling Congress, don't worry about it, we got this, is completely misguided.
Right. Okay. And then, so again, sorry, I think you covered this, but let's one more time for myself and my listeners that I know none of us are experts on tariffs. What exactly would the 232 tariffs do? How would they be implemented?
So the 232 process is Commerce launches an investigation. They could do it in cooperation, obviously, with USDA. There's formally an interagency component. They're supposed to consult, so you could do one. I like the idea. Well, it's not actually not my idea, but I've heard ranchers talk about a grazing livestock 232. And that's to cover sheep, cattle, beef, and lamb. And so if you get that investigation, and it's clear. You just look at the rising net port, like all the crisis. The RCAF has done such an excellent job of documenting the loss of ranches, declining output. The herd at its historic lows. Obvious national security threat. Beef's an essential protein. I'd say the best protein. I'm sure your listeners would say that too, maybe. And then and so with that finding, that gives the president authority to adjust imports. That is a very robust authority. Unlike some of the other powers, like Section 301, which has to be renewed every 4 years, 232 is indefinite. It doesn't have to be indefinite, but there's no time cap on it. And
so it would be proving that your industry is shrinking.
No, it's so that's like that's some of these other ones, like the Section 201 safeguards that lamb ranchers did use about 25 years ago. Those ones you have to like prove material injury and whatnot. 232, it's not about proving anything. It's just, is this product a national security concern? And are imports threatening the national security? If so, the president can, and the statute says, I'm quoting, adjust imports, whether it's through tariffs or quota, however he sees fit, to mitigate that national security threat.
Okay.
It's I would call it almost a blank canvas. And so I really hope that Secretary Rollins, from what I've heard, she's not unaware that this thing exists, and we got to get USDA and Commerce working together to get these going. And even if they're super sensitive to consumer prices right now, you can still use this process to not change and actually do the process, implement a presidential proclamation. It wouldn't change. It doesn't have to change anything right now, but it can at least at quota levels for 2028, 2029, and so on, to give that certainty today to start rebuilding the herd.
And it could be like quotas, different quotas for different countries, or would it be like?
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. And in your opinion, would quotas be better? Quotas and tariffs? Tariffs.
Yeah, I mean, this is hyper in the minutia. The current beef quota is just, or is it the current cattle quota? But so the two different. I mean, there's absolute quota, which just once the quota is filled, imports are banned until the next quota period. It's a little heavy. It's a little heavier, and I'm generally a little cautious about absolute quotas because a ban is a heavy thing, right? And if there's like you're eliminating these like maybe very inconsequential small volume specialty orders, right, potentially got caught up on that no one actually cares about. Right. So I kind of prefer a tariff rate quota where you can have in quota, and I mean obviously they're super sensitive to consumer prices right now, so leave the in quota duty free if you want, if you don't want to see any price increases. But then you have an over quota tariff where it's not going to make sense for like ranchers will have enough certainty because the major buyers, the Walmart, McDonald's, and they're not going to have incentive to plan procurement around imports because they're not going to want to pay that over quota tariff. But I'm just thinking like if it's a high end Japanese restaurant and they want to import this Japanese beef, and for them it's like, okay, well I have to pay $50 for this pound. They'll just do it because you kind of like, you don't want to ban these kind of weird things. Like automotive is a perfect example, right? Like why have an absolute quota on automotive? And if somebody wants to import the rare exotic, I mean, India has 125% tariff on imported cars, and rich people can and do import cars, and right, they'll just pay the tariff. And I think maybe that's a better way to go personally, but I don't let that preference stand in the way of doing something. Let's just get something. And
it would still then be a percentage. You're still talking about a percentage.
No. So a tariff rate quota, meaning instead of an absolute ban, there's a tariff. But so sugar has a tariff rate quota system, and it's been very successful up until about this year, thanks to all the inflation we've had. So with sugar, is a country that started out with no sugar, and we imported 100% of our needs. we're down to 25%, like, or I should say 75% of the sugar consumed in America is from America. That's incredible, and a real testament to the success of sugar. Which, by the way, we had free trade in sugar in the 70s. It was a disaster. So we went back to this totally managed trade protective system. But okay, so they switched sugar to a tariff rate quota in like the early 1990s. The over quota tariff for sugar is 15 cents a pound. And I guess that was high enough in the 90s to deter imports. But between inflation and there's a current like global oversupply, the world is, awash in excess sugar right now. And so we're seeing large volumes of sugar coming in, paying the 15 cents a pound tariff.
Mhm.
So yeah, I definitely prefer specific tariffs, but with the, especially in this day and age, they got to be adjusted for inflation. That's not rocket science. Okay, the government does that. For all sorts of government fees are adjusted annually, including customs COBRA fees are adjusted annually for inflation. So it's an oversight on our specific tariffs that we don't do that right now.
Okay. So you would like, let's just take Brazil, for example. In your ideal world, we would set a quota, right? That Brazil.
In an ideal world, you set a global quota. Okay, because at the end of the day, ranchers, they want to know how much of their market, how much of your home market are you going to lose?
Right.
How much are we giving them?
Which country it came from.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So you come up with a global quota number. It's probably impossible to stop presidents from deal making. So once you've got that global quota number, if they want to choose to give more, you can just do it. It's one global quota, first come, first serve, whatever, let it rip. Mm-hmm. Or they can choose to allocate it country by country. I generally do think country by country I think there's like a lot of countries where we just don't trust their, health standards or whatnot. Right. So I wouldn't presume to tell you, oh, we should, that's not for me to say, that's for others to come up with, like, okay, well, who do we allocate the quota to? But yeah.
Right. Okay. But then once that quota was met, let's say it was a worldwide quota, once that quota was met of 1 billion pounds or whatever that was, then a 20 cent per pound tariff or something like that would
kick in. Yeah. And it should be high enough to deter large volume imports.
And what would that be? I mean, do you have a?
God, I mean, what is like beef? What is it, like $6 a pound now?
Ground beef, they say, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't have an answer for you on that, but I don't know. I mean, it's certainly maybe a few dollars a pound. I don't know. That's a good question.
Yep. Okay. All right. Very interesting.
But USDA, I mean, so USDA actually has something called the WASDE report. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Yeah, mm-hmm. Right. I mean, and so for sugar, they have this dialed in. Like, they know exactly. They track domestic consumption. They and when there's some countries who rely on, like, I think Philippines is a big sugar supplier. Okay. And when they had like the El Nino problem, I mean, I just really point to sugar to show that the government, if with a good policy, actually can execute. Mm-hmm. And with sugar, they when there's changes in production, whether at home or in a foreign country that we import from, they're very good at dynamically adjusting the quota. Mm-hmm. And likewise for consumption. So yeah, we can do this. It is being done already. Mm-hmm. For sugar. It was peanuts, another one, and peanut butter. We have quota on Canada we have a very tightened peanut to peanut butter supply chain. Canada's got a strict quota. So yeah, this all can be done, and none of it is totally new.
Right. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Well, I think that's probably enough for today on my side. Yeah, unless there's any.
No, this has been great. Thanks so much for reaching out, Carrie.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and I'm sure we will be talking again. So
take care. Have a good weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye.